Catalyst 2030 is a movement of social entrepreneurs and innovators embracing collective action to achieve the SDGs by the deadline of 2030. Our 1,500 members are active in 197 countries. By emphasizing collaborations, Catalyst 2030 is leveraging the power of the collective to accelerate real change in the lives of billions of people around the globe. What do our members say about Catalyst?
Catalyst 2030 is an invaluable global community of impact entrepreneurs.
Our relationship with Catalyst 2030 has really taught us the power of co-creation.
Join Catalyst 2030 and network, bond, and collaborate with our family members.
And I like the spirit of bringing change makers together to share and learn from each other.
Catalyst really understands the transformative nature of collaboration.
It's also a platform that can give us new tools and resources.
Catalyst 2030 has put my work on steroids.
But most importantly, to come up with solutions that are practical, ways where we can really make things happen, because social entrepreneurs are doers.
Are you a catalyst? Join us to achieve the SDGs.
And welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening from wherever you're joining us today. So welcome to this session on day one of our Catalyzing Change Week. This session is looking at how we create enabling environment for social innovation to flourish. My name is Matt Patton. I look after the donor relations and facilitate that for the Catalyst 2030 Secretariat. I just want to briefly, in a few seconds, frame the session for today. We conducted a strategic review of our global membership at the end of 2021. And one of the key areas that percolated through that evaluation of our members was that they wanted us to focus on shifting funding and financing paradigms and focus on this as a movement, as a strategic imperative. Catalyst 2030 has a fairly unique view of initiatives underway that are already starting to shift the needle in moving these paradigms right across the globe. And so Catalyst's response is to play the role of an honest broker to bring together these initiatives and actors. And we've got a brilliant lineup of individuals and organizations today who are already working hard to do so. And what better person to talk to us a little bit more about what we mean by honest broker than our systems change expert, researcher, lecturer and writer, having recently co-authored a book on systems change with Francois Benici, the systems work of social change. I'm really pleased to welcome and introduce Cynthia Rayner.
Thank you so much, Matt. It's great to be here. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to everyone. You know, what's interesting about this session is that it's actually operating at two different levels. We're going to be talking about a number of different really exciting initiatives which are working to shift the funding paradigm on a global scale. But we're also going to be looking at how Catalyst 2030 brings these initiatives together as an honest broker. So if you want to kind of fracture yourself during this session and think about what's happening both at the meta level with this honest brokering framework, and then also looking at the individual initiatives to see how they are individually driving and collectively changing the way we think about funding, I think you'll have an interesting experience. I just want to talk to you a little bit about the honest broker, and I'd like to start with a story. The concept of honest broker actually was a term that I learned about 7 years ago when I first met Jeru Bilamoria. I had traveled from Cape Town, South Africa to Amsterdam to meet Jeru and her team at Child and Youth Finance International. And when I spoke to them about the work that they were doing, I was intrigued by the role that they were playing in creating economic citizenship opportunities for children and youth. And when I asked, what is the role that Child and Youth Finance plays in that sector? Jeru said to me an interesting thing. She said, "We are an honest broker." And I said, "Gosh, what does that mean? Tell me a little bit more." And she went on to articulate what she had been thinking about over a number of decades and through all of the initiatives that she had already been working on, about this idea of how an honest broker is needed in order to facilitate a change in a sector, in a geography, in a way that we think about a specific thing. It essentially shifts the narrative, but it also brings people together to shift that narrative. What is an honest broker? What was she telling me at that time? Well, it's taken me many years to really grasp Jeru's fundamental concept and the way it plays out in the world, but I'd like to share with you what I've learned today. The first is what I'd like to say is what it's not. So many people might think of an honest broker as a backbone organization, kind of a guiding force, a central operating unit for a movement. That's not what it is. In fact, it doesn't act centrally at all. It doesn't act, in fact, in a top-down or directive way at all. An honest broker is really the mediating force among many, many, many different activities that are happening across the globe. How does an honest broker work? Well, first of all, it acts honestly. That means that it has to act with integrity. It can't direct, it can't be working behind the scenes to try and push an agenda. It can't privilege certain voices or certain ways of working. What it has to do is act with integrity, listening, seeing all of the activities that are happening across a sector or across a geography, and link those things together. That's why we use that word broker, because it's a mediating force. It really looks at all of the emergent activities that are happening by members and starts to percolate those up. It amplifies them by connecting them with one another. Again, like I said, it does not privilege certain voices. It does not select goals or activities as being more important than one another. Rather, it allows those things to trickle up, and it listens very carefully to understand what are the things that are most important, what are the priorities to members, and how can those member priorities be elevated and amplified across the network. It also makes connections. So that's what you're going to see happening here today. The amplification of activities, but also the linking of initiatives so that they can see in other initiatives the work that they are doing and have the opportunity to learn and grow from what others are doing in different geographies, different sectors, different areas. And then finally, an honest broker does serve an essential coordinating activity in that it paves the path from an administrative and coordinating level so that those activities can continue to operate, can link with one another, and can essentially be elevated over the course of time. I'm going to stop there and I'm going to allow you to see what an honest broker can do. Matt is essentially acting as our honest broker by bringing together this amazing group of individuals to talk to you today. And I think you'll see the work in action as you can see all the different threads that are combining across these different activities. We have 7 really interesting initiatives to look at today, and I'm going to read them out loud, and then we're going to basically be treated to a buffet of exciting activities. The first of these is going to be Manmeet Mehta from Ashoka talking about a funder diagnostic tool. Then we're going to be speaking with Peter Brach from Propel Philanthropy about broad impact philanthropy. Then we'll turn it over to Rodney Christopher from BDO FMA to talk about a funder collaborative tackling the nonprofit starvation cycle. Brad Myles will talk to us from Panorama Global about an NGO call for action and the funder pledge. Then Tim Hanstad from Chandler Foundation will talk about the funder learning group here at Catalyst 2030. Willeke van Rijn will talk to us from the Resource Alliance about shifting power and the International Fundraising Convention. And finally, we'll end by Shaady Salehi talking about trust-based philanthropy at the Trust-Based Philanthropy Initiative. So a lot of exciting activities all brought together by the honest broker of Catalyst 2030, and many of these acting actually as honest brokers themselves. So I hope you'll join me in looking at the 2 different levels of this session, and I'll hand it over to Manmeet.
Hi, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation. Thank you, Matthew, and the Catalyst team, and everyone for just sort of joining in here. the story of the diagnostic sort of emerges from one of the very first collaborative efforts alongside Catalyst. So Ashoka and Skoll Foundation, Echoing Green, Compact, the entire Catalyst network, and McKinsey all came together along with the Schwab Foundation, and we released a piece of work together, which is a set of not just opinions, but a set of experiences and learning from social entrepreneurs and funders in one voice, which sort of suggested the values and principles around which systems change entrepreneurs were finding that, you know, we were able to move the needle forward. And those sort of set of principles and values were released in a report called Embracing Complexity in January 2020. But soon after that, a group of us, as part of a working group within Catalyst, were sort of grappling with this idea of how do you translate that and operationalize that. We were, you know, starting to, in the middle of summer of 2020, experiencing not just a global pandemic, but sort of a reckoning, especially in America, but all over the world. Systems were sort of creaking at the edges, and it was speaking really powerfully to one of the hypotheses behind which, on which Catalyst is founded, that if you really want to look at the SDGs as a realistic goal that we can accomplish within the next decade, we have to think about systems change as a key piece of our strategy to get there. So the tool emerged from that thinking and said, how can we take these learnings and translate this into a more practical set of self-reflection questions? So it's an invitation to funders who are interested in expanding their portfolio of investments in systems change solutions, who are interested in changing their funding focus to not just include one type of investment, but what is systems change investment, what that looks like, what those grants look like. And most fundamentally, it tries to parse out those principles into three different categories, because grant making practices can't change if culture doesn't shift. And so it looks at those principles, and in that, how does it affect the culture and mindset within a grant-making organization? And what is the strategy to operationalize those mindsets and cultural norms into grant-making practices? So essentially, it's a set of about 35, 36 questions, at the end of which you get a score. And it's meant to be a learning journey. It's meant to be invitational. This data isn't revealed publicly unless someone actually says, hey, you know, share my score out loud. And it yields results in terms of, here are some practical suggestions, here are donor communities that exist. You know, Tim's going to talk about the work that's been happening in the peer learning community around this. There are tools, there are experiences, there are case studies on how we can provide practical support in the funder journey to fund more systemically. And all of it sort of comes down to culture and strategy and grant making practices all interlocked and working together. Did I wrap on time?
You did great, Manmeet. Thank you very much. Okay, let's hand it over to Peter to talk to us about broad impact philanthropy.
Unmute myself. Well, what is broad impact philanthropy? Let me start by, first of all, my name is Peter Brach. I have been in philanthropy for 10 years. I've been working with grant makers or writing grants for about 8. And recently I put together a network of about 30 organizations that I call broad impact organizations. And what is broad impact philanthropy? Well, it is actually meant to meet funders where they are. So for example, let's say you've only provided program funding for a nonprofit. Well, you may consider providing operational capacity funding and see how you can make a broader impact at that level. The same applies to whether you're working for a coalition or a network or a platform, which obviously has hundreds of organizations, you know, working under it, or 100 or whatever it is. It has a larger number. That's even broader impact. And then, you know, the next levels where it really clearly becomes broad is when you're talking about organizations that help many causes across many different areas. You know, Catalyst 2030 does that, TechSoup does that, Giving Tuesday does that, the National Council of Nonprofits does that, or the National Council of Foundations does that. And so there are many organizations like that. And those are the organizations that I'm working with I wish I could work with everybody, but you only have a certain amount of bandwidth. And so that's where I'm focusing on. And we're working on a collaborative media campaign to increase appreciation, understanding, and support for this subsector. And we're early stage. I'd say that, you know, in terms of what we've accomplished, I think honestly, relationships, I think we're building some really good relationships between us. We're all really excited about doing this and moving the needle. I think in terms of challenges, we've got what for us, what we're working on is inspiration. How do you inspire people to change? And one of the main ways is by providing really great stories that show very clearly how somebody put an input of, let's say they provided a development person in 2 years, they, you know, increased their amount of money for the organization by a certain amount. That's, you know, and then you get enough of those stories out and people really say, wow, there's impact involved in this. That's kind of the way we're working. So our big challenge is how do we create that inspiration? And I feel like I've probably gone about 1.5 minutes to 2 minutes, and I guess I've said pretty much what I have to say. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. Why don't we head over to Rodney? And Rodney, why don't you tell us about your funder collaborative?
Great, thank you, Cynthia. Hello, everyone around the world. It's a privilege to be here with you. I'm Rodney Christopher. I am a managing director at a consulting shop called Video FMA. I have been in the field of nonprofit capacity building for 30 years come November, but I'm really only 2, so I don't know how I pull that off. Very quickly, I've had the privilege of facilitating a collaborative of 12 large funders, mostly based in the US, plus Oak and Switzerland. And they call themselves Funders for Real Cost, Real Change, or FRC. I will put their names in the chat shortly. They have attempted to tackle a question that has long plagued our sector, which is essentially, can project grants be structured in ways that do a better job of supporting the financial and organizational health of grantees, NGOs? Importantly, I and you all know that if all funders simply covered indirect costs in project grants, we would not have systems change funding. I would, however, like to point out that if more funders actually did that, the NGOs that we care about would be stronger and therefore capable of using systems change funding better. So I see this as being an important building block in the work that we're trying to do collectively. Among the things I'll point out to you is that this project commissioned research from Humentum, which looked at the impact of funder cost recovery practices on global grantees, or grantees in a global context across 10 countries, importantly around the world. So I will put in the chat links to the first of 3 articles in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, where this collaborative has shared about its work. The second of those will tell you about the Humentum research, as well as a link to that report. I will also give you a link to Funders for Real Cost, Real Change website, which is being run by Ariadne and Edge Funders Alliance, which aims to add case studies for funders to learn more about how they can approach this work, as well as to engage the field more generally going forward. So I'm going to stop there, make sure we can keep going. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Rodney. I'll head over to Brad. You want to tell us about the NGO call for action?
Sure. So great to be with you all today. And I'll echo and build on some of the themes that have been shared. One, so when we opened up, Matthew mentioned that there was a broad call throughout Catalyst that shifting funding practices and shifting the funding paradigm was a priority for the majority of the members. So when Catalyst did its 3-year strategic review, that really emerged. And so a lot of these initiatives that you'll see weaving together are meant to be in line with and in responsive to that call from the members. So you had the Embracing Complexity report that Manmeet mentioned, and then you had the funder diagnostic tool, which operationalizes those principles in the Embracing Complexity report. And one other log on the fire that we strategized to do through the working group and throughout Catalyst's board was a broad call to action from Catalyst's membership. And then not just Catalyst membership, but for NGOs worldwide. And the reason for that is because Embracing Complexity is a report, it's not necessarily meant to be an advocacy tool. And the funder diagnostic similarly is meant to be facilitating the self-learning journey within different funders, but it's also not meant to be an advocacy tool. And so this was an opportunity for Catalyst's members in partnership with NGOs around the world to really speak with a collective voice to say these are the principles that the NGOs are emphasizing that would enable bigger impact for NGOs if these principles were more prioritized by funders. So we, through the working group in Catalyst, we came up with this idea of this open letter. We then tried to have conversations with all of Catalyst chapters to receive feedback. We then wound up working on this group writing process that we meant to be as inclusive as possible, trying to really play that honest broker role that Cynthia outlined. So there wasn't kind of an agenda behind the scenes. There wasn't, it was meant to be really a group writing process. So we had 40 different groups contribute to writing the letter, really landed on a place of these 10 principles. And now we're in the stage of organizing signatures around the world, rolling it out within the Skoll community, the Ashoka community, the Schwab community, the Echo and Green community, the NGO community broadly. And we're hoping for a goal of 1,000 organizations signing on in this international call to action. So far, we have about 350 organizations that have signed on, and the sign-ons will be happening throughout the next month until mid-June. And then the letter becomes one additional tool in this toolbox alongside the funder diagnostic, alongside the Embracing Complexity report, alongside multiple other things that are being featured today. It's not meant to be the be-all and end-all, but it is one expression of the collective voice of NGOs around the world have agreed these are the things that are holding them back from bigger impact, and these are the things that would be as impactful as possible if funders made these shifts. So I'll share the link to the letter in the chat. It's now up on a web page, so you can read the text, you can see the signers so far, and know that this will be being worked on over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And then there'll be a launch and a rollout plan and plenty of other things to happen once the letter is actually complete, and then it can be leveraged as a tool for impact. So happy to talk about that and would love to take you all's questions later.
Thanks, Brad. And I just want to point out that the letter is in the chat box. So please, for those of you on the call, click the link and make your signature. Okay, let's hand it over to Tim to talk about the Funder Learning Group at Catalyst 2030.
Everyone, glad to be sharing this space with you today and to tell you a little bit more about the Donor Learning Group. This group is a collection of about 70 funders and funder support organizations from around the world who meet monthly because of our interest in the intersection of equitable systems change and philanthropy. The group's vision is a world where the funding community is embracing systems change approaches that include people at the core and a partnership-focused role. And we have monthly meetings where we aim to learn from each other and from outside experts about the topic, to build a community of practice, and to discover and act on specific ways in which we can change both our mindsets and our practices. We started the group about 1.5 years ago, and one of the first things we did was we conducted a co-creative landscaping exercise to try to document what resources, what groups, what deeper learning opportunities already existed at the intersection of philanthropy and equitable systems change. And that co-creative exercise resulted in a systems change philanthropy landscape document that my colleague Clara is going to share in the chat. I'd encourage you all after the meeting, if you have time, to take a look at it. And if you have other organizations, other groups, other resources or events you'd like to add to this resource, this document, please contact Clara. Her document or her email address is also going to be in the chat. Within our group, we're encouraging every member to undertake the funder diagnostic tool that Manmeet described earlier, and to use the results to make specific time-bound commitments on what our individual funding organizations can do to improve our practices. So we're in the process of building a template that funders can use to make those commitments, to more effectively align their practices and their approaches with the type of support that's needed for equitable systems change. So in sum, our group is a modest, it's a low-cost engagement for funders who want to learn more about equitable systems change, who want to identify opportunities for deeper learning and action, and to get to know other funders who are also on this learning and action journey. So for you funders in the audience who are interested in joining, we'd love to have you. We meet an hour a month. We have engaging, inspiring presentations at every meeting. And if you want to join, again, contact my colleague Clara. Again, her email address should be in the chat. She'll send you the information you need to have to join. It costs nothing except for your openness to learning, your openness to having a mindset change, and a minimum of 1 hour a month of your time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim. I'm going to hand it over to Willeke van Rijn to talk to us about the Resource Alliance.
Yes, thanks very much, Cynthia. Welcome, everyone, and a real pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. I thought maybe instead of me explaining about the Resource Alliance, we can use this opportunity for a brief video to share our manifesto. So let's see if that works.
We exist to serve you, amazing fundraisers, change makers you, all of you committed to tackling inequality and injustice, who advocates for basic rights and dignity, expose corruption and deceit, and protect the many diverse kinds of life on our planet. Connection is why we are all here. Transformative shifts are happening everywhere. Boundaries are blurring, new models, new thinking emerging, ideas unleashing, people connecting, mobilizing to make change happen. It's thrilling and amazing. What do we do with all of this unprecedented opportunity? We embrace and we harness it. Our commitment to you, to be a bridge, an alliance of the most vital human, intellectual, and financial resources needed to build a better world. We work with energy and conviction, with social impact organizations of every size and type. We curate leading-edge thinking, taking our collaboration to new heights. It's about humanity. It's about our collective power to create change. Because we can. Because we must.
Right, I think it's really addresses a lot of the things that everyone has been talking about already. You know, we must collaborate and we really must look at system change to create bigger impact. We have once a year a big conference. It's called the International Fundraising Conference in the Netherlands, and it provides access to innovative thinking, best practices, collaborative networks to support fundraisers and entrepreneurs across the world to really grow their ability to resource the causes they serve. It's also a kind of a triggering event to really look at new solutions to create a bigger impact. And there, of course, collaboration is really crucial. Our theme this year is shaping the future together. And if you're talking about together, we are really looking at together within the sector, but also beyond the sector, because collaboration is the key to success. We haven't reached the impact needed yet, and therefore we need to look at different solutions, but also different actors, and really help shaping that future together. I want to share the link to the event with you because we are opening at the moment our speakers appeal. So if you're interested and you really want to share your thoughts and your ideas, you will be very welcome to join, because again, you know, doing it together hopefully will create those new solutions that we can share across our kind of common networks and yeah, people around the world who really want to create that impact. And I strongly believe that there we are supporting hand in accelerating and fast forwarding that impact that is required. So thanks very much.
Thanks so much, Willeke. And now I'm going to hand it over to Shaady Salehi to talk to us about trust-based philanthropy.
Hello, good day, everyone. Great to be with you. My name is Shaady Salehi. I'm the Executive Director of the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project. And just by way of introduction, I've been working in the nonprofit sector for nearly 2 decades. And trust-based philanthropy, which you probably maybe have heard about, really the core of the meaning behind trust-based philanthropy is an approach to giving that addresses the inherent power imbalances that exist between funders, nonprofits, and the communities served. So a lot of the themes that you've heard from all of our speakers or before me are really reinforced in a trust-based philanthropy approach. The project was launched in January 2020 with really the intent of fostering a peer-to-peer learning and advocacy community wherein we hold one another accountable in philanthropy to recognize that a lot of the traditional practices in philanthropy have actually gotten in the way of nonprofits achieving their intended impact. So the Trust-Based Philanthropy Project creates space for this kind of peer exchange. We have a peer listserv where funders can pose questions and insights with one another. We host webinar programming very regularly, exploring these concepts and showcasing stories of funders that have shifted their practice. We also support organizations that are actually intentionally trying to shift their practices toward embracing a less restrictive and more trust-based approach to this work. So the advantages of this movement, or at least what we've been seeing so far, is that there has been an opening to re-examine the status quo of philanthropy. As our other speakers have shared, the events of 2020, from the pandemic to the racial reckoning that started in the US and kind of panned across the globe, really has opened up many funders' eyes to the fact that our status quo approach is really not working. There needs to be a different way of doing the work. We need to acknowledge that a lot of nonprofit leaders have expertise in the work that they do, that we must trust and listen to that expertise, and that as funders, our role should be more in collaboration and partnership and bolstering and supporting, rather than enforcing restrictions and compliance and all these other things that have actually perpetuated an intense imbalance that has gotten in the way of us achieving our bigger picture intended goals as a sector. So the advantages are that in recent time, there's been a real eye-opening among our sector, and there's a real interest in shifting practices to be more trust-based. The challenges are that it's not just about practice change. As Manmeet and others have shared, this is really about re-examining how a hoarding of power exists within our cultures, our structures, our leadership, and it requires a real close examination of how values of systemic equity and racial equity and power sharing show up in our cultures, in our structures, in order for us to be able to practice our work differently. So this is a paradigm shift that is underway. But again, it is about much more than just changing our practices. It's actually about re-examining some of the roots of what has actually shaped the way our sector operates and interacts, and the way our sector sees community leaders and nonprofit leaders. So the more of us that are out there that are really encouraging that shift and embodying and modeling what it looks like to embrace a power conscious leadership approach, I think the more we will get toward the paradigm shift that we're all seeking to get to. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shaady. And actually, we have an 8th entrant into our mix, and I would like to invite Brendan Cullen to tell us about shared trust.
Sure, absolutely. This is a tough group to go last in. I have so many questions and so excited just to learn about all the different initiatives, and huge shout out and thanks to Catalyst 2030. This is an exemplification of being an honest broker to give all these opportunities a chance to send their messages and to share. So Jeru and Matthew and Cynthia and the whole team, just so thankful for your support. So Brendan Cullen, and I've been working quite closely with Courtney Cabot-Benton, who's actually the CEO of the Shared Trust. She's under the weather and coughing a lot, so I'll attempt to give a quick update on this new platform that we've been building together with a team that includes Chilande Kulobawaria, who's not here, and a number of other team members who are in Kenya and in Uganda, called the Local Coalition Accelerator. And the Local Coalition Accelerator integrates a number of the things that have already been discussed. The first pillar of the model is to provide support to local and national organizations who are coming together to serve their communities in a holistic way. So it's not a sectorally focused model, it's a coalition model, focuses 100% of its support on local and national organizations. And the how we do that is we're providing 3 years of financial and technical support for local coalitions to actively create their own governance structures, listen deeply to what the communities are saying that they want, and then actually coordinate a set of holistic responses that they design and that they measure and evaluate and that are supported over the course of 3 years. And we have 3 coalitions that are up and running. One is in Uganda that started in 2020. And then we've just launched coalitions in Bangladesh. The coalition in Bangladesh is with Start Fund and 4 local and national organizations focused on climate risk mitigation. And then there's a new coalition launching currently in Nigeria and Adamawa State, also focused on humanitarian response with 100% local leadership. So that's the first pillar of support is really to focus on building a bridge and providing coalition holistic support. The second piece is a very active focus on how we can ensure sustainability and ownership. We're all aware that 95% of international development financing does not come from philanthropy, it comes from governments. And the vast majority, 98% of that or more, is filtered through mega INGOs in the UN, and most of it gets dissipated by the time it gets to a local or a national organization. And so our goal is to ensure that we are helping to shift bilateral power, bilateral process, and bilateral funding mechanisms such that these coalitions at the end of 3 years are directly financed by the largest and most sustainable donors. And we've been working in deep partnership with USAID, FCDO, and others on that piece. And then the final piece that we're working on is once these proof points have been established, we also realize that many bilaterals have massive local and national development initiatives that are sector focused, that are not responsive, that don't deeply listen to communities. And they have actually come to us and asked for support on how they can take this coalition focused approach and apply it to their regional or national strategies. So those are the sort of 3 pillars of what we're working on with the Local Coalition Accelerator, and really just thrilled to collaborate with all of you.
Thanks so much, Brendan. I think, like Lewis shared in the chat, I think we must all feel that way. What a wonderful set of 8 initiatives and just a lot of information to absorb. One of the things that I've seen across many of these sessions and many of the interviews that we did in order to develop the report is that a lot of times these sessions are about making small connections that allow collaboration going forward. So I'm sure many of you are like me, kind of percolating with many ideas right now as you hear about all of these initiatives. I'd like to now open it up to questions, and I'd love to either take questions from the chat box, or you're welcome to put up your hand and I can open up the floor for you to ask your question. And while you're thinking of your questions, I would like to follow up with a question of my own here. I just want to ask the group, what do you think are the key advantages or the disadvantages, if you will, about this honest broker role, about having connective tissue amongst all of the different initiatives that are happening right now to shift the funding paradigm? What do you believe that Catalyst 2030 offers, or other networks that you belong to that create this connective tissue? Anyone would like to go first from our group? Thank you, Tim. Yeah, tell us.
So one of the big advantages I think that Catalyst 2030 offers as an honest broker is to help in some, at least small way, and hopefully over time a larger way, is to rebalance some of the power dynamics between donors and doers. Catalyst 2030 is a donor-led group. It's while we're encouraging, a doer-led group. While we're encouraging donors to participate, it is largely a group of doers who are providing these connections and creating these convening spaces and acting almost as a, I think I heard Brad say one time, a union for social innovators around the globe to speak more powerfully and more collectively. Because we all know that the power dynamics between donors and doers are fraught with imbalance, which also means they're fraught with broken feedback loops. So I love the way that Catalyst 2030 is helping in at least some small way, and hopefully bigger way over time, to tip the scale a little bit more towards the doers.
I love that, Tim, tipping the scale towards the doers. Do we have any other responses to that question? And then we can move on to Joanne's question in the chat. Anybody else want to talk about what that can offer? Yeah, Shaady, thanks.
Yeah, just to build upon that, I think, there's not one way of shifting power. There's multiple ways to do it. And so I think there's a real advantage in having multiple efforts, kind of comparing notes, working toward the same end goal, and reinforcing that there is not one way of doing it. I think the sector of philanthropy tends to get drawn to, the shiny object, or this is the thing now, this is the thing to do, and there's a certain way of doing it. But there's multiple strategies that we need to deploy in order to address this end goal of a more power conscious, community-centered approach to philanthropy. So I think the more voices that are singing in unison toward these same values, the closer we can get to that end goal. So I see that as a tremendous advantage.
Thanks, Shaady, that's great. I'm going to move to Joanne's question in the chat box. And Joanne asks, I'd love to know what's most needed to ensure these coalitions can continue and grow to work together and actually make the change they all want to see. And I'd love to invite one of our participants who has not yet spoken. Yeah, Willeke, thanks.
Yes, I think it's a really interesting question. And I think it's also building on what Tim and Shaady were already mentioning. I think it starts with addressing there is a problem and starting to talk about it. And that's what we're doing at the moment. I will really say we are absolutely ready for that next step. And we address it sometimes within our network as it's very nice that we have expressed them and we have those sessions around them and we address the issues, and maybe some thoughts are ready around how could it really help. But what we want to establish is kind of a do tank. The next step, a group of people and organizations raising their hand and say, we are just going to try. We're going to test, we might fail, and that's good to fail, but because that means we can optimize and express that to wider coalitions and communities and networks again, to learn so that other really can see what works, what doesn't work, and start that initiative of let's not only talk about change is happening or change is possible, let's really show the impact and become role models of we are practicing, what we are preaching. And I think we are absolutely ready for that right now. And we should, yeah, we should all start raising hands and say, we are going to implement this right now and communicate back to the wider audiences out there to say it's time to practice it.
Thanks so much, Willeke. Does somebody else want to add anything to about widening, making these coalitions work further?
I'd like to just say that, am I muted? No. I'd like to say that I think the difficulty and the challenge that we all face is how do we inspire funders to see the value of coalitions, to understand, that I was saying in my example, that if you were able to bolster the one coalition, that coalition may have 100 to 1,000, members under it that value from what it does. And so I think we need to find a way to help funders understand that it's actually very efficient and effective to support coalitions.
I think that's an absolutely wonderful point, Peter, and something that definitely has come through from the Catalyst Network about how do you coalesce all these voices. People thinking that it's inefficient, but actually, in fact, it's go slow to go fast, that oftentimes when those voices coalesce, there's so much speed and urgency that can be propelled from it. Luvuyo, thanks for raising your hand. You want to unmute? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks so much, Cynthia. It's been great. Kind of a session. I'm kind of thinking now from an Africa context. The members are seeing Catalyst as a great broker for the membership because there's a feeling that the funding that comes from Africa doesn't come to local. So it comes to the usual suspect that probably understanding so well how the system works. So they becomes usual that they get the funding now. So by joining Catalyst and being member Catalyst, they understand it's a union, but there's kind of a feeling that Catalyst can play a role in terms of, from that funding. Could be mobilizing, could be trying to kind of like a capacity, also could be a funding aspect that comes in now. So I'm kind of like how that can be looked at. I'm not sure exactly from a Catalyst point of view, but how can be looked at in terms of how can, through that coalition and movement, that we could look at this issue of funding through the areas where this funding becomes a scarcity and the difficulties in terms of funding now, so that it can be, go down to the locals where it's needed most now. So I'm kind of feeling that there's this kind of a talk, but the money doesn't come in where it's needed. It just go to the people that are not being able to do any impact in the local aspect.
Thanks, Luvuyo. That's a great question. And I'd like to, if possible, invite Manmeet to respond to that if she's here, just because I think that funder diagnostic tool has a role to play. Manmeet, are you able to answer that question?
Thanks, Cynthia. And Luvuyo, I think that's a really good point. And we do sort of integrate this perspective on how our when grant making decisions are being made, but even before, when funders are learning on what is the best way to frame a problem and understand a problem, how are we talking to different perspectives that operate in the system. And that's sort of the space where we're inviting reflection on where the learning happens, who are the stakeholders that funders are talking to, where does the decision making lie for each grant? So to what extent is it participatory? To what extent is it board governed? And all of the options in between. And I think that's a gap, and the diagnostic sort of tries to invite reflection both from sort of a cultural and approach standpoint to sort of what is the strategy? It's like what is important when considering the solutions that can be perceived as most innovative. Does that answer or speak to your point a little bit, Luvuyo?
Yeah, no, it does in a way, but I think I still feel that it's still early around that, but there's a long way thinking in the longer run to kind of like formalize this, because it's an opportunity of like probably second biggest number of the members of Catalyst that have been members, that part of the need is that even on Wednesday when we launch Africa Forward, one of the key part of that Manifesto of Africa is based around the funding aspect. So I think that kind of, it's something that I really think it's much more important that it has long-term thinking that we could look at and change the system at the moment, whether the moment doesn't benefit, which is like well supposed to benefit.
Thanks, Manmeet, and thanks, Labuyo. I want to reach out to Brendan to talk about this as well, because you mentioned, Brendan, that the real bulk of the funding is not coming through philanthropy. Philanthropy can kind of be a catalyst, but in fact, there's a large amount of funding that's coming through non-philanthropic actors. Brendan, do you want to talk about that a little bit, about how the funding can be directed even through philanthropy acting as a model?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, having worked for a while in philanthropy, it wasn't until 2 years ago that I actually stepped back and delved in with some help from Courtney and others just to do some research. And what I found was really kind of surprising to me, right? That, again, 95% of financing for all international development comes from donor governments, with USAID being by far the largest. And out of the 5% that's philanthropy, half of that, 49%, is Gates, right? And so if you're not funded by Gates and you're not able to sort of jump through the massive process hurdles for a USAID or an EU or an FCDO or a Global Affairs Canada, you're essentially fighting for 2.5% max of financing, right? So the role for philanthropy is to be that 2.5 to 5%, as we see it, to be as flexible as possible, to be as open to just redefining risk, to creating proof points, and really making the case in a very concerted way with the bilaterals who are absolutely crucial to any of this work scaling. And if we can do that collaboratively, we feel that, and we can do that with bilateral partners who are open, very, very open to doing this, that we can really set a new paradigm. And that's our platform, the Local Coalition Accelerator, absolutely requires philanthropy to make these initial investments. But philanthropy is not interested in writing a long-term check, and the grant sizes are never going to be large enough to support things that will be at a regional or national scale, right? And so if we're really serious about local and national ownership over the long term, I think figuring out ways that we can partner with philanthropy to be catalytic and to work in partnership with bilaterals, as messy as it is, as hard as it is, as bureaucratic as it is, as many times as these things have been promised, but to believe that that's possible, and hopefully that can be part of our work here together with Catalyst.
Thanks, Brendan, and thanks, Rodney, for putting these resources here. Rodney, I'd actually just like to invite you to be our final answer to a question, just thinking about really the program aspect of this and thinking about how you're trying to shift programmatic funding to be able to achieve these large systemic objectives. Much of what we're talking about is shifting mentalities, but you're actually trying to make that happen with the existing paradigms, if you will. Can you just give us a couple of tidbits and then we'll wrap up?
Sure, thanks, Cynthia. So you're asking a fantastic question, obviously, and I guess I would say this: more people who work at foundations want to do better by the organizations they fund than probably seems the case based on the actions that they have been taking. So what I see, based on just hearing our colleagues here on this call, I see my role as being taking that intent and gently and sometimes forcefully pushing them in the direction of doing better. And so this question around program funding, as you likely know, the overwhelming majority of funding provided to NGOs around the world is restricted to certain projects. And what we're trying to lift up, and we're seeing some real interest. I mean, these 12 funders were not, ordinary funders. These are folks saying we really want to do better, is to say, look, You can still do project funding if that's what's the most important thing. You're not willing to get on the bandwagon of general operating support. But if that's what you're going to do, can you at least make sure you're not harming the organizations you're funding? And so that's the dialogue that we're involved in. I'm hopeful. There are days when I lose my hopefulness, but I'm trying to stay there. And I'm excited to be part of this group, if I may, while I have the floor, just to reiterate a couple things I've been hearing. First and foremost, we need everyone on this call and anyone who is connected to this work to just do something. Rather than talking about it, just do something and share with the field what that is. And really importantly, being involved in this community, talking to each other, as Shaady, I think, put in the chat, or someone else did, that we really need to be in conversation with each other to learn about what it is that we're all doing so that we can try to minimize duplicative effort and really build on what each of our strengths is. I think we have lots of possibilities. So thank you for having me.
Thanks so much, Rodney. And what a wonderful message to wrap with, this idea that a diversity of our efforts, experiments can actually coalesce into broad-based change. I think that's what we're really here to support. So I think you can see the two levels that we worked at today, introducing lots to shift the funding paradigm, but also acting as the honest broker. We really wish to keep this conversation going. We want to be able to connect with the broader group of actors that have joined here today and that will be joining us over the course of the week. Please reach out. Please reach out to the speakers from today. I'm sure that they would love to hear from you. And let's keep this conversation going. Let's keep the ideas percolating. Let's do as Rodney urges us to do and share with the field. Matt, is there anything you'd like to do to wrap us up today?
That's great. I think, Drew, maybe if you've got your hand raised for a final word.
Oh, no, it wasn't for a final word. It was for a suggestion. 5 people have suggested in this group. So, and many of them are new members. Many are existing members of Catalyst. Some are people. So why not just create this alliance of everyone working on funding systems change or funding change? And this is everybody. And we sort of try to create the web of whoever is there. We bring everyone in, and each person, so like if Willeke has a conference, all of us will help with that. If Rodney has something, all of us will help. You know, everyone just now helps with Brad's letter. I'm just calling it Brad's letter. Sorry. You know, when Brendan and Courtney are doing something, we all get together. So I think what would be really lovely if everyone's there is the concrete action from here could be that we all agree that each one has diverse strengths, and that's what I was listening in on. And we come together to have 3 or 4 common things that we want and support each other. So it's like a supportive network of every one of you who's trying to think things. I know Peter's been trying, everyone's been trying, all of you here. So it would be fantastic. And then we have Tim, he'll shepherd us through with all of it. So what do you all think? Can we say we at least start trying to create this connective tissue of supporting each other? And just see where it goes? Yeah, I see lots of let's do it. Okay. Yeah, and yeah, Willike's offering a conference. Let's see how we can leverage that also. Fantastic. So let's make that. Sorry. I was just excited listening to everyone, so I thought I'll say that. Sorry. Over to you, Cynthia. Sorry. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much, Drew. Yes, I see lots of applause and lots of I agrees. Excellent. Wonderful, everyone. Well, enjoy Catalyzing Change Week. There's lots to come. And thank you so much for participating in this session. Great conversation.